and then we will encourage your input into the discussion towards the end. So for now, it's my honor to be able to introduce Mr. Ekow Duka. I think you must please tell me if I got that pronunciation right. Maybe just, is that correct? Or how do we pronounce your name?
Yes, the name is Ekow Duka.
Thanks so much. So Ms. Ekow is the founder of the AI Shop, an early stage venture that deploys language models as productivity enhancing tools across a range of industries and job types. Ekow is also a co-founder and board member of Zindi, Africa's largest professional network for data scientists and AI practitioners. Prior to this, Ekow was the Chief Analytics Officer at the Retail and Business Bank at Absa Barclays Africa. He's also worked as an oil field engineer across Africa. In his spare time, I'm surprised you have any, Ekow consults on data and AI-related matters. He also writes fiction and is a published author of 4 novels. Well, we're very grateful to have you, Ekow, in the session today, and we look forward to hearing your presentation and for you really to set the scene of this afternoon's engagement. Thank you. I'll hand over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. How does that look?
I think it needs to be on slideshow presentation. I'm not sure if you're using a dual screen, but we're seeing the smaller screen at this stage.
In the smaller screen?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. That.
Ekow, I can also share it from my side if you'd like.
How does it look now?
It's still the same, so I don't know. Would you like our admin colleagues to help share the screen?
Yes, sure, please, yeah.
Okay, so if you can stop sharing and then we'll flat it.
Okay.
Okay, I think you still have to stop sharing.
I'm doing that now. Hold on.
Okay, there what? Okay, then if it can be flatted, Mutsu, thank you. Okay, great. It's up. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. If you give me a minute to start it from my side. Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm really privileged to be able to speak with you about the use of data for growth and recovery. So my name is Ekow Duka. I'm the founder of the AI Shop, co-founder of Zindi. And as the host said, I was formerly the head of analytics for Absa's Retail and Business Bank. Would you move on to the next slide, the one with the oil rig, please? Okay. So this used to be my office, and I used to work as an oil field engineer. So this meant that I lived in very small, cramped containers perched above the ocean and miles away from land. One feature of an oil rig is the constant preparation for disaster. So we would run regular drills so everyone aboard would know what to do and where to go in case of a fire or an explosion. So we were essentially building up or storing capacity to draw upon should a crisis hit. And I think in some respects, a city is rather like an oil rig because it's a concentrated hub of economic activity. with a mandate to deliver a better future for thousands of people through those that work in it. We should move to the next slide, please. So you're no doubt familiar with this photo, which was taken in the center of Johannesburg when an underground pipe burst. Right? And we all know how stretched our cities and our municipalities are at the best of times, teetering, some would say, on the brink of multiple disasters, from homelessness to crime, to inadequate healthcare, and a lack of economic opportunities. So it's with this in mind that we turn to data as one of the tools available to us to help us to navigate crises better, and also provide us a sound platform from which to recover and grow. And I think that sounds extremely ambitious, right? So when you think about to navigate, to recover and grow, how do we actually do that? And it turns out that there are a few tried and tested principles or steps, and I'll share those with you now. Would you move to the next slide, please? The other thing which the host mentioned was that I'm also an author. So what I'd like to do is to talk you through these steps through the lens of a few well-known novels. So let's start with this one. It's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So this, of course, was the story of a doctor who was able to change into his nemesis, the evil Mr. Hyde. Would you move to the next slide, please? So just like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, in my experience, when you work with data, it can feel like that. It can be your friend or it can be your enemy. And I think for many of us, when we're faced with a mountain of data that is so dirty and jumbled and uncoordinated, we may not even know where to start. So that's when data can feel more like a Mr. Hyde than a Dr. Jekyll. Next slide, please. You'll also know the story of Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. And there's this iconic scene when Oliver, who is hungry and malnourished, approaches the master of the workhouse and asks, "Please, sir, I want some more." Now, he wasn't asking for a gourmet dish. He was just asking for a little more basic sustenance. Your first data projects should be like that. Next slide, please. So you want to run pilot projects to gain momentum. And it's much more important for your first few data projects to succeed rather than be the most valuable data projects. They should be meaningful enough so that the initial successes will help your organization gain familiarity with data and also convince others in the organization to invest in future data projects. But it shouldn't be so small that others would consider them trivial. The important thing is to get the flywheel spinning so that your data efforts and your data team can gain momentum. Next slide, please. Now, this next book will appeal to the Arsenal fans in the audience. It's the autobiography of Arsene Wenger, a Frenchman who managed the English club for more than 20 years. And the book is called My Life in Red and White. But through many ups and downs, what Arsene Wenger did very well was that he focused on building successful teams, and you need to do the same. Next slide, please. So you want to build an in-house data and analytics team, because while outsourced partners with deep technical expertise can help you gain initial momentum faster, in the long term, it will be more efficient to execute some projects with your own in-house team. And furthermore, you'll always want to keep some projects, probably the more sensitive ones, you probably want to keep them within the organization. Next slide, please. Now, the next book, Nervous Conditions, it's a book by Tsitsi Dangaremba. She's a Zimbabwean novelist and playwright. The book is set in colonial Rhodesia, and a pivotal passage in the book is when Tambu, the main character, gets to go to mission school, where she relishes this rare opportunity to learn. I think that data is very similar. Could we move to the next slide, please? So you want to provide broad training around your data. And fortunately, with the rise of digital content, including online courses such as Coursera, ebooks, and YouTube videos, it's very cost-effective these days to train up large numbers of employees in new skills such as data and AI. So to give you a sense of the relative effort required, you probably want to consider providing training to your executives and senior leaders. That's probably around 4 hours worth. And then your leaders of divisions, that's about 12 hours. Then your data scientists and engineers, who of course will need a lot more training, and that's around 100 hours. Next slide, please. So now we come to strategy, The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. It's a 16th century treatise for new princes. It's a how-to guide, or you can think of it as a strategy. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that building a strategy does not come first. Some people will think that it's important to develop a data and AI strategy, and it should be the very first step. But in my experience, most organizations won't be able to develop a thoughtful AI strategy until they've had some basic experience with data and AI. So that's exactly what partial progress in steps 1 to 3 will give you. Next slide, please. The final book I'd like to talk about is Dreams from My Father by Barack Obama. And Mr. Obama, as you know, is an electrifying orator, and he's a masterful communicator. And I was lucky enough to hear him speak at the Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture in 2018, and he was very, very good. You should look to communicate your data efforts as well. Next slide, please. And I guess with the audience in mind, there are a number of levels at which one should be thinking of communicating. First of all, would be your government relations, where cities and municipalities face unique challenges to stay compliant. So developing a credible, compelling data and AI story that explains the value and benefits of your project can be an important step in building trust and goodwill. Then, of course, you have your customers as well, because data and AI will bring significant benefits to your customers, your clients, or the citizens. So you want to make sure that the appropriate marketing and product roadmap messages are shared widely. And of course, there's also talent and recruitment, where because of the scarcity of AI talent, strong employer branding will have a significant effect on your organization's ability to attract and retain such talent. It's simply because AI engineers want to work on exciting and meaningful products. So a modest effort to showcase your initial successes can go a very long way. And then lastly, you want to think about internal communications. And I think that's because AI today is still poorly understood. So it comes with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And you have many employees who will rightly be concerned about their jobs being automated by AI. So clear internal communications, both to explain data and AI and to address such employees' concerns, will help reduce any internal reluctance to adopt data and AI. Next slide, please. So some of you may be thinking, but I can't write code, right? But the good news is that nowadays you may not have to write code. And if you can move on to the next slide. Okay. Because nowadays you can chat with your data using language models. In the old way, and I say old under advisement, one would typically look at 6 to 12 months to be able to launch a prototype into the market. Now with language models, that time has been cut to hours, days, and weeks. Because with the rapid development of language models, and think models like a chat GPT, you can literally chat with your data in much the same way that you would write and send a text message. And I think that's extremely exciting. Next slide, please. So here is the final slides, and I call this 5+1 takeaways, just to summarize what we've spoken about. So first of all, you want to execute the pilot projects in order to gain momentum. You also want to think about building an in-house data and AI team. You also want to provide broad AI training, including the data team and the senior decision makers. And only then would it probably make sense to develop an AI strategy. And also don't forget to communicate your data and AI efforts. And then lastly, it's helpful to remember that language models these days can let you chat with your data. So being able to write code shouldn't be such a hurdle. So thank you very much. So that brings me to the end of the talk. I hope it's been helpful. And thank you once again for allowing me to present.
Thank you so much, Ekow, for that presentation. Really creatively done and very simply put in terms of the key messages you want to share with us. And one can see that you've got a whole lot of experience and knowledge that you have been able to impart in such a meaningful way to us, and I think such a visual way that it will stick with us. So thank you for that framing and really starting to talk to us about how we can use data, technology, and innovation, how we need to be thinking of preparedness for crises, and how we need to pivot using the knowledge that we are able to gain and the systems we are able to put in place, and how we interpret that information. So thank you, and we hope you will stay. And colleagues, do feel free to put any questions to Ekow in the chat. We'll pick them up in the discussion. And also, Ekow, if you want to respond to some of them in the meantime, if people do come in with questions, that would really be appreciated. I didn't say at the outset that if people would like to just rename yourselves in the chat so everyone knows who's in the room, from which organizations, cities, private sector, civil society groupings you're from, it would really make the session interesting, and people could start networking and understanding who's interested and from which perspective. So colleagues, we're now going to introduce the panel that we have today. And we've got, as I said, 3 panelists who are each going to be presenting for about 10 minutes. We're not going to be having questions and answers after each panelist, so please note your questions on a piece of paper or in the chat for us, preferably, and then we will bring it together. So after the 3 panelists, we will then also have a respondent who will come in. So the first panelist who I've got the pleasure of introducing is Ms. Faith Sithole. So Faith is the lead for data science and analytics at Sasfin. She's a thought leader and a speaker. She currently serves as the lead for data science and analytics at Sasfin. She has more than 10 years of experience in IT, working on various data projects for organizations such as MTM, City Power, Transnet, PepsiCo, and APSA. She's also a multi-award-winning author and podcaster. So there seems to be a trend in terms of the sector. So, Faith, you are very, very welcome. We're really wanting to learn from you, hopefully through some practical examples and case studies of how private sector-led initiatives have leveraged data to make decisions during crises. So I'll hand over to you, Faith. If you can also put your camera on, that would be great. Thank you.
As I'm putting it on, thank you so much, Karen. Can you hear me?
Faith, we can see your camera. We can't see you for some reason. We do see your presentation though. Your screen is gray, but oh, there we've got you. Thanks.
You see me now?
We can see you, and yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Karen, for a wonderful intro. So without any much waste of time, I would like to greet everybody in this cold. I'm not sure where you are, in terms of the demographics, but in Joburg it is extremely cold. And I hope that everybody is warm wherever they are. And thanks once again for this opportunity to come and, and share a little bit of what I've learned throughout my experience with data today. So without any much waste of time, I think let's just shoot. As I speak, please jot down your questions. As Karen said, you can also post them on the chat box. We'll see, maybe after this I can try to engage with people as much as possible. So okay, Hlompho, can you please move to the second slide, because this one really doesn't have anything. So I know before we can talk about the tools, what can we do to leverage from the different sectors outside of our municipality, and what can we learn from what other industries have done. I think I just want to talk about the basis of what data is. I know that when people talk about data, a lot of things come into their mind. Some companies, they start to panic because they're asking themselves, are we there? Do we have what is needed for us to do whatever that we need from the data, as far as data is concerned? So basically, data, I'm sure we all know it, it's just a mixture of meaningless words lying around, numbers. But what's more interesting is that once you start playing around it, it begins to make sense. And that is where you can start generating information based on whatever that you have in your systems, or wherever where you actually capture your data. So can you please click for me? So what happens is that I would like you to think of Legos. I'm not sure if you've played Legos before, or your children have Legos, but Legos is just like pieces of things that they have different shapes. They mean nothing, but once you start playing around with it, you can build beautiful things that would actually make sense. So think of it like data, like you've got a packet of Legos, different colors, different sizes, and stuff like that. But if you can just sort out those Legos, put them in yellow, collect all the blacks, put them aside, yellow, put them aside, green, orange, and whatever color, put them aside, then that is when you are starting to understand the kind of data that you have, to say, okay, I have this kind of data. You sort it first, and then after that you arrange it. You can arrange it by size, arrange it by shape, and also arrange it by in different forms. And then after that, you will be able to then present it based on how you've arranged the data. Then you should be able to present the data the way you want, in terms of whatever insights that you actually want. As I said before, that Legos is just a lot of pieces that, sometimes as parents, we get a little bit annoyed by having all these pieces all around. But once the children, or once after we start playing nicely with them, we can build a house, we can build a train, we can build a car, we can build whatever. So same thing as the data. In companies, we have data. Data is lying around. We don't know what kind of data we have. We know that we are capturing data. We are receiving data from our customers, but we don't know how it looks like, because it's not sorted, it's not arranged, it's actually all over the place. But once we have the right systems in place, it will start making sense. Can you please go to my next slide? So now, before I talk about leveraging data to identify opportunities, or even during times of stress and crisis, I want to challenge everybody that is in the room, right? I want you to ask this question. In an entity that you are working in, do you guys have the right tools to begin with? Do we even know what tools are needed for us to be able to use data the right way? First question. And then second question, do we even have the right people? The right people that we have in our entities or in our companies, are they the right people to execute what we need done? And then secondly, are we following the correct, those people, are they following the correct processes? Do we even have processes? Are they even captured? You know, are our people even data literate? Do we know what data literacy means? You know, are we literate that much when it comes to data in terms of, do we understand our data? Do we know where is it stored? How is it stored? How can we get access to it? Is it something that we know? Before we can even start playing around and telling beautiful stories, I think we need to answer these questions. Are we literate enough when it comes to data? Are we aware of the kind of data that we have or we capture? Because in most cases what happens is that we have our customers, and maybe if they want to buy certain products with us or services with us, we give them the big forms, the application forms to fill in, and they will fill in those application forms. But after an application form is filled, where then does the data go? Where is it captured? How is it even captured? You know? So can we move on to the next slide? So now what happens is that I'm just going to dwell a bit on the slide, right? So what happens is that before we can even start telling beautiful stories or start using our data, we have to first understand the biggest challenge that different organizations face. You know, so in my past 12 years of experience with data, this has been the biggest challenge when it comes to data quality. Because sometimes you find that there is data, but is it complete? You know, do we have the right address? You know, when we capture addresses, do we capture the street name, the street number? Do we, capture the town, the suburb? Do we capture the zip code? Do we capture everything that we need? Or maybe when we capture the address, we just say Centon, Johannesburg. But is it complete? Because if the data is not complete enough, no matter what we do, we can't tell beautiful stories and bring insights that can make us take or make better decisions on how to grow our business. And then also, is it accurate enough? And what are the measures that we measure accuracy with? Do we have those business rules in place, that will actually determine the accuracy of data? Is even the data valid? Is it valid enough? And how do we measure validity as well? Is it even unique? Or as Sithole, there's Sithole, there's current, but maybe they share the same ID number, but is it the correct way to do it? Or how do we actually identify the uniqueness in terms of the data that we need to keep? Is our data consistent? We have multiple systems within the company. The data that I get from system A, is it the right data that I'm getting from system B, or things are just messed up around? So now, before we can even move into telling beautiful stories, we need to start the self-assessment, if I can put it like that. As the entities, we need to be able to sit down and ask ourselves right questions, as I've actually said earlier, and also measure in terms of data quality to say, as a business, where are we actually when it comes to data? I normally call it as cleaning your house first before inviting any visitors. So we need to then look at how do we then clean the house first and put the right things in order, so that you don't find a bed in the kitchen, or you don't find pots in the bedroom. We need to sort things around and make sure that we have sorted the data and arranged everything else before we can even start to procure tools. Because that is my next thing as well, is that the other challenge that I've also faced as well is that the limitation of tools. You find that there are so many projects that are brought in place that people need to start working on, but you find that there's a huge limitation when it comes to tools, because most companies, you find that maybe it's just Excel. So I have a privilege. I've worked for City Power, like I think in 2013, if I'm not mistaken, 2012, and 2014, if I'm not mistaken, for 2 years. So I was a data analyst there. And the data is there. The data is captured on forms. The data is captured on application forms. And also the data is captured on Excel, in different kind of Excel. The data is there, but we didn't have the right tools to tell the beautiful stories that we had. So when we do the self-assessment, I think those are the things that we need to leverage from on what different sectors, out there are doing, to say what are the current trends in terms of tools, which tools can we procure as a company for us to be able to enable the people to even follow the right processes when it comes to things like that, and then also making sure that when we have the right tools, I'm going back to the point of people. I'm not saying let's retrench because we don't have the right skill, but what are the things that as a company you are doing to upskill your people? Are they attending the right training? Are they attending the right data conferences? Because I've had a privilege of speaking in so many data conferences that were happening across industries, our municipality attending, our municipalities, are they attending such data conferences? Because that is where you learn about current trends as well, and that is where you learn about what other businesses are doing. And it's just a matter of making sure that the right people, the people that we have, we upskill them so much that we can be able to use them in terms of making sure that everything that we need to know with data, it actually happens. So I will tell you one big challenge as well that also happened is that I'm sure you guys know NASA, depends on which school you went to, right? So they are the space researchers. So what happened is that they lost the entire orbit. In orbits, that little thing they sent to the space to go and collect information with the camera and stuff. So what happened is that they sent it, and when they sent it there, it could not capture data, because when they built that orbit, they built it with a certain programming language, right? And they sent it to the space. But what they used to control it, it was actually based as well on a total, complete programming language. So when the orbit was up there at the space, the two could not communicate. They lost it, they couldn't find it, and then they lost millions. Why? Because the data was not accurate. The systems they were using were mismatching and they were misclatching as well. So I think those are the things that we actually need to leverage from in terms of, do we have the right things to begin with that we need as the different entities of municipality? Do we have it? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right tools? Are we following the right process? Are we data literate? Do we even have a data strategy? Because there's a business strategy to say, as a business, this is the strategy we are following. But do we have a data strategy? And who has put together the data strategy? Do we have things like a chief data officers? Do we have a person who's responsible for the entire company to run with the data and stuff like that? Do we have everything like that? So those are the questions that we actually need to start asking ourselves on whether
Okay. I just want to alert you a little bit to time. So if you can wrap up in about 4 minutes. So just be aware of your time. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. I'm actually trying to rush because as I was saying to Hlompho, I have a lot to share, but I will try to actually wrap it up. So maybe if I can just share one insight on the things that we also need as municipalities or cities, we need to learn from or adapt to, is data science. So data science is actually around having the data strategy to begin with, and secondly, having the right people with the right skills to actually drive the data related projects, and making sure that we have the tools like your Power BI that can tell beautiful stories. We can have right tools that we can use as companies to actually produce the meaningful data that will actually tell the stories that we need. But now I think I will just hold myself right there, Karen, up until maybe we get the questions, and then everything else will be driven by the questions that we get from the platform.
Thank you so much, Faith, and for your passion there. You can see that you've got a lot of passion for this work and a lot of knowledge. So thanks for sharing that. I don't see any questions coming up in the chat, and I think it's partly because you are so clear in your delivery. But also, colleagues, I think what would really interest me if some of the cities began to reflect, because we know that cities are different phases of this data and AI journey. And there are cities that are putting in place the capabilities that Faith is talking about. So it would be really good to know if the inputs that Faith has made resonates with where you are at, what your experiences are, and sort of maybe for you to share a little bit about where you are in your data or AI journey, what capabilities you are putting in place, you know, what tools you're using, maybe for sharing, so that we get some of that information. And then later, Faith, maybe for you to talk in the question and answer session around sort of you working now in the private sector. So what are the opportunities for data sharing between the public and the private sector? And what are the mechanisms that we could enable this? So thanks so much, Faith. And then colleagues, any, you know, sharing experiences, your own journeys in the chat would be useful. We're now going to move on to a presentation by Mr. Julio Sabu, and focusing really on public revenue mobilization for inclusive economic growth. Now, Julio is executive for operational research at SARS. He's an executive manager, a business area head responsible for research, insights, and intelligence. He has been at SARS for more than 20 years, specializing in tax and customs taxes by conducting empirical research to gather insights that drive revenue and compliance activities across the SARS value chain. In order for the organization to achieve its strategic objective, which is to increase and expand the use of data within a comprehensive knowledge management framework. So his work output results in organizational improvements, such as strategy formulation, policy improvements, and the attainment of the SARS mandate for revenue collection, trade facilitation, and compliance enhancements. So I've had the privilege of meeting Julio before, and in our collaboration around the spatialized tax data. So really welcoming you into the room, and looking forward to your input on demonstrating how the country is going about sort of steering growth at this particular point in history, and how data is being used to enable this. So I'll hand over to you, Julio, and I'll just keep an eye on the time. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Karen. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just share my presentation quickly. Presentation mode. Perfect. Is my presentation visible to everyone?
It is, and it's on screen show. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, cool. As per the introduction, I work for SARS, and I've been in SARS for more than 20 years, and in various divisions, specializing in tax and customs revenue. So I'll be taking you through on our journey with data. As you know, we are one of the biggest data collectors in the country. And as such, as you are familiar, the South African economy challenges are well documented. We have a real GDP per capita that has declined since 2015. Productivity growth has been slow, and there is also been a high unemployment, as well as increasing from the already low levels, and as well as high inequality remains also very high. In addition to these challenges, these include the high level of inequality, spatial distortion, as well as a shrinking tax base and low levels education. So the decline in investment commitment impacts fiscal sustainability of a country. South Africa, like other developing countries, face the same decline, and to improve fiscal capacity, a country must mobilize resources and build impactful governance strategies aimed at sustaining the fiscal in the country. So a country's fiscal health is measured by tax to GDP ratio. Most developing countries, tax ratio is around 15% compared to the upper middle income countries with a tax ratio of around 35%. South Africa currently, we average around 25%. To this effect, the South African Revenue Service, SARS, exists to serve a high purpose because our work enables government to build capable state, to foster sustainable economic growth and social development that serves the well-being of South Africans. Everything we do is about having transformational impact on the well-being of the lives of the people, especially the most vulnerable among us, by the 12,800 employees from SARS, serving 26 million registered individuals from a population of 62 million. The SARS vision for 2024 is to be a smart, modern SARS with unquestionable integrity, trusted as well as admired by others. SARS cannot win the transformation battles alone. It requires a collaborative effort with key strategic partners to mobilize public to collect more revenue for an inclusive economic growth. As part of the transformation journey, SARS started to make quantum leap advances in the fields of information and communication technology to improve on operational effectiveness as well as efficiency. SARS modernization program, which started back in 2007, has seen a wide-scale migration to electronic channels, minimized the introduction of human error, which resulted in a high-quality data-rich environment. The organization continues to make use of the available information on taxpayer and inform risk assessment and reduce the administrative burden for the majority of compliant taxpayer. Through the pre-population of returns and declaration documents with data from own system and third-party sources like your banks and other financial institutions, SARS is able to reduce the opportunity risk for false or inaccurate declaration. This process further reduces compliance cost and taxpayer and result in more efficient administrative for SARS. Most recently, as part of the Vision 2024, SARS is committed to increase and expand the use of data within a comprehensive knowledge management framework to ensure integrity, drive insight, as well as improve outcome. And this has been achieved through partners with National Treasury as well as Uniwider. The Southern Africa Towards Inclusive Economic Development program builds on the successful collaboration between Uniwider and the National Treasury during the 2014-16 and regional growth and development in South Africa. The 2019 to 23 Uniwider work program focuses on the interlinked development challenges of transforming economies, states, and societies and maps them against the SDGs 5, 8, 10, 16, and 17. By mobilizing research evidence for action through the ongoing process on the UN and its member states, the Institute continues to work with stakeholders to strengthen capabilities for research, technical and policy analysis, and facilitate exchange of experiences and knowledge towards bold and collaborative development solutions for countries and regions around the world. The SA Tide program directly supports the SDG 8, which is about promoting inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all SDGs, Goal 17, in particular for SA Tide, which work stream 2, target 17.1, which is to mobilize resources to improve domestic revenue collection. The partnership journey with National Treasury and Uniwider is making available anonymous data directly speaks to the key must-win battles for SARS, which is to broaden the tax base, improve voluntary compliance and fiscal citizenship, leveraging our resources, maintaining crucial partnership with government stakeholders locally as well as internationally, as well as building an organization with integrity and that can be trusted and admired. tax administration records finds the use outside the tax administration process. And in this case, tax administrative data in many countries underpins the production of official economic statistics. Like in the case of Stats SA, as in many countries, VAT and CIT records are used by Statistics South Africa to create business registers and sampling frames for all official economic sample surveys. Tax record can be used for direct derivation of statistics for planning and evidence-based decision-making. In this case, increasingly tax data is being used in the evaluation of economic and social policy and to assess the impact of incentives and targeted interventions. Currently, a collaboration project is underway to use firm-level research for policy analysts.
Julio, I'm just going to have to ask you, say 3 minutes. So if you can just keep going. It's really fascinating, but 3 minutes. Thanks.
Okay, cool. So SARS is committed to be a data-driven organization with data product and analytics and visualization that are delivered in a manner that provides one version of the truth and insight to drive optimization strategic direction of the organization. So the Uni-Wider project, which is well known within within SARS as well as the other partners, it's something that we are leveraging on, and I'm just quickly gonna move faster here. And you will see that through that partnership, we have built the national a lab at the National Treasury, which can be accessed by researchers, policymakers, academia, anyone that requires to have access to tax data for research or any other work that is required. So the National Treasury and the Presidency are jointly responsible for Operation Vulindlela, which supports the implementation of structural reforms that are required to unlock high level of economic growth. National Treasury modeling indicates that successful implementation of the 2020 Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan can raise growth to beyond 3% by 2030, with structural reform contributing the largest part of this growth. As a continuation of the SA Tide Phase 1 and 2, this thematic area will be focused on expanding the use of the tax administrative data for tax policy research, as well as supporting the research effort of the South African Revenue Service. To this, the South African experience has shown that it is possible to make sensitive tax data available for research without compromising the anonymity of firms or individuals. Many processes are in place at SARS and National Treasury secure data facility to protect the data integrity of the taxpayer. A good example in this case for the collaboration, it is the Spatial Economic Activity Data South Africa, collaboration with academics, metros, and National Treasury as a point. The National Treasury has approved and signed off support for the State Integrated Business Register, the State IBR project, and the inclusion of this as a project of the Uni-Wider Agreement and the National Treasury's South Africa Tide program. This forms part of the Memorandum of Understanding between SARS as well as Uni-Wider. So to fully capitalize on the opportunities presented by advanced analytics, SARS should continue to collaborate actively with other countries to fully explore the analytical world. And the South African Revenue Service is pressured in redefining its tax system priorities, which encourages good governance, inclusiveness, and social justice. All tax administration must focus on raising enough revenue as part of the government's way of strengthening the state functioning and renewing the social contract between government and its citizens. 'Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julio. And just to really applaud SARS and recognize SARS as a lead in the public sector in terms of the commitment of the organization to collaborative data sharing, sound data governance, and partnering. So I really think SARS making available the anonymized tax data and also looking at making available the SARS integrated business register is really changing the playing fields in South Africa in a very positive way. So thank you so much, Julio, and colleagues again, encouraging any contributions in the chat, any responses to what you've heard from Julio, the work that SARS is doing collaboratively with other partners, and also from the city side, maybe sharing some of the ways you've been using the data, because a lot of you are already accessing anonymized tax data, either through the work of the SA Tide program or Seed SA. So now, colleagues, again, just mindful of time and really sorry to the presenters, they have to push you a little bit, but we now have the opportunity for the respondent, Ms. Hlompho Mphanje, please do come forward and really reflect on the input you've heard so far from Faith Sithole and Julio Sabu, and then also talking a little bit from the municipal perspective, highlighting what you think should be considered when you start collaborating with local government around the use of data for responding to crises, recovery, and growth. So I understand that Hlompho is a specialist group strategy, policy, coordination, and relations at the City of Johannesburg. She has specialized in international relations, or she's in the international relations division at the city and holds a master's degree in development economics. Hlompho's technical experience spans across a wide range of industry. She was previously served as an assistant director in policy and planning at the private office of the mayor in the city of Johannesburg. She's worked in the economic research sector as an economic analyst and in the retail sector as a planner. So, Hlompho, we're really looking forward to your reflections on what you've heard by the panelists so far. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for such a beautiful introduction. Yes, indeed, I think all my life I've been a planner. I call myself a planner. And I think throughout, that span, I've seen the importance of using data. Basically, I think I loved what Ms. Faith said. She mentioned the three things about looking at, is your data going to the right people? Is it the right time for you to use that data? And I think those are the cornerstones that we need to have when we look at data. She also mentioned data challenges, and she mentioned that we need to know, is the data complete? Is it credible? Is it valid? And how is it used, and what tools do we have? And I think it's important for us to link this to, I'll just divide it into your looking at data from the crisis point of view, looking at it from recovery and growth as well. I think we can all agree that data is important. It serves as a foundation, and when we use data, we are able to proactively prepare for disasters, to proactively respond as well to challenges that we did not have mitigations for. It is also important to use data in our plans at initial stages because it helps in optimizing operations. And as such, we are able to achieve sustainable growth and navigate through economic challenges. And like I said, with Faith, you would need to know what data you are using for what. For instance, for the city, when we look at a crisis, we look at things like, what are we using these historical patterns that we are having for? We identify patterns that provide insights that help for early detection, in case we go through such challenges in the future. We are able to optimize and know where to allocate our resources to. So it's a matter of resource allocation. And we are also able to identify which locations, need us to respond better to. So it's a matter of predictive modeling when it comes to a crisis. In terms of recovery, you look at data and you think we need to do an economic impact assessment. This is where you analyze and find your business model and see how you can tailor make for your recovery. It's important to look at the data's incidence, at the data severity, at also the intensity, because this then helps, it showcases the frequency. When you look at your incidents, it will show you your frequency, from analyzing what has been happening in the past, so that you can better forecast in the future. Then you look at measures that will look at your severity. This is then the impact of whatever it is that has happened. How does this impact? How much will you need then to respond to this? And also the intensity. This is the characteristic of your challenge. What lies, say there's a fire. How did it start? Unfortunate situation that we had of a building that burned. You need to look at how did it start? Our disaster planning, has it taken this into account? Also, I think Ekow also mentioned the Bree road breakage. What learnings can we learn from it as a city? We need immediate responses and safety measures. And this comes from analyzing our past historical data, emulating what has happened in the past and putting it through there. We need to have investigation and root cause analysis to help prevent similar problems in the future. We need to communicate with our and be transparent, so that our community and citizens know what's happening. Because they are the people that are affected. They are the people that when we talk to, they know exactly what happens, and we get data from there. I will actually share just a few examples of how the city does this. Right now, I'm just giving an over, or projections of how data is managed in the city. And I also loved what the second speaker spoke about in terms of bringing in firm level data when we analyze and look for economic data, because it's something that we really have struggled with. Unlike surveys where it's data that comes from secondhand people telling us about it, we need to know exactly where our tax, who is evading tax, how can we, find measures to go in and deep delve so that we can generate revenue for the city. I'd just like to give practical examples where the city has actually used data, to manufacture. Right now, we're in the process of doing, with the SDG, how do we, as cities, we know that sustainable development goals are, the global phenomena that normally is looked at a national level. But how can we as cities, as we know that we are at the bottom, right? And we are the ones that deal with the people, communities, and how do we then get data that is credible to make sure that we add on to the global agenda of this? The city of Johannesburg has currently gone into doing a sustainable development tracking device. This is where, sorry, I just need to go into that one. It's we call it voluntary local reviews. We are actually in a state of continuing one, I think, this month. We track 92 domesticated indicators that are relevant for the city. This is where relevance is important. I think there's SDG 17, which talks about ocean. We do not have an ocean in the city, therefore we cannot contribute towards that. So it needs to be important for you to know the relevance of your data. We will then monitor and evaluate progress for the data and use it. How does this sustainable development identify into the targets of SDGs? We will strategically position the city through the SDG reporting tool that I've just mentioned and benchmark the progress. What we also love as the city is that we don't just look at data as numbers, We are involved in like a global network where we share with like metropolis across the world, with like other cities where we share our experiences, share learnings, bring in all this in order to see what has worked where. Are there similarities that we share with these metropolises? What can we learn, and how can we then better influence our policies going forward? Another practical example, for COVID, during COVID-19, we saw what that has done to our economy, you know, our infrastructure, in terms of allocating resources. The city partnered with GCRO, the Gauteng City Region Observatory, to do their fifth quality of life survey centered around COVID. So basically, it was in 4 individual indices that assess health disaster of the city. It's called a health disaster vulnerability index. We have 4 indicators. They literally look at exposure to risks. They look at difficulty to cope with risks. They look at the third one, the health vulnerability and emergency services. What was interesting was that indicator 3 for the city ranked the highest, which was the indicator that showed that there is a very high risk of difficulty to cope in terms of finances, because we are financially stressed. Therefore, people are finding it hard to cope with whatever that happens. These are the things that we need to take into account when we plan better. How do we make sure that we find programs that will look at not just people that are able to do, you know, indigent people of the city? How do we include them in all our programs? Another program that we used as a city, it was the Resilient Performance Rating. Here, the city emulated the Arab City Resilient Index. What happens in this one, it reflects an overall capacity of the city to survive, adapt, as well as thrive, no matter what chronic stresses or shocks that the city experiences. And in this one, what we found, it was that it is critical that cities or organizations have leadership and management that knows exactly what it's doing, that are able to make decisions here and then, because that can impact on how long it will take for implementation processes to happen, you know. And
Hlompho, I'm just giving you a 2-minute warning. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen. So yeah, I'll just to conclude, Karen, I think I agree that it is important for organizations to just have a dashboard, you know, that will just show your long-term strategy. How do you want to get to that, you know, be it the other short-term and mid-term indicators that will add on to the higher long-term strategy. And you need stakeholders, you know, data from stakeholders, because their responses, they are the people that advocate for change. These are informations that literally can help hold leaders accountable. And we know, just to conclude, that metros are the centers of economic activity. They are the centers that can boost employment. They are the centers that can bring in innovation. So literally addressing inequalities, creating sustainable human settlements using data will lead to an inclusive and sustainable growth. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hlompho. And what was really great was you starting to really show practically the link between the data, city policy, and programs, and how it should all come together. So very appreciative of that. So if I can ask all the panelists now just to switch your cameras back on again, and we're going to go into the question and answer session. To the participants, if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. We'll keep an eye on that. We'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So while we're waiting for participants to ask questions, I'm going to ask the presenters a couple of questions myself that I've been taking note of. Faith, when after you presented, I mentioned that it would be quite good to have your perspective from the private sector perspective. Obviously, within the public sector, we've been looking at public sector administrative data sources and how we can share them. But if you reflect on cities and the information needs of cities, what sort of private sector, particularly from the banking sector, data sets that are out there that you could think could be really valuable for us? And how do we start building those bridges between the public and the private sector to start sharing information that could be in the benefit of or within the public good? So can I ask you maybe to respond to that, and then we'll go further. Faith, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you. So firstly, I would like to say there's absolutely nothing wrong when it comes to sharing the data between different sectors, but there's only one limiting factor, which is POPI, because POPI, for an example, I was running a project as well in my current company where POPI said, delete all the data, if it's 5 years or older, just delete it or mask it, but don't make it available. And also, if you have certain data, there's certain attributes that you can't show to the public, so it's okay to show Faith Sithole, but it's not okay to show her ID number, for an example, so there are certain limitations and there are certain regulations that are put in place to actually protect the customer. But now, I think one of the things that I would like to see is just to check the payment behavior, right? Because sometimes you find that people are not paying their rates and you would want to learn more about the client, and you say, just not the credit score, but just the behavior of the person. If they have, let's say maybe if they have a product with you guys, like what's their payment behavior? So that you will be able to treat your customers well. You can be able to flag them and say, okay, Faith Sithole, we know that she is a person who regularly miss her installments, for an example. So this is how we're going to tailor track Faith when it comes to her paying our rates or whatever that she needs to be paying. So it will be very interesting to actually see that.
Thank you, Faith, for that response. And just saying that maybe from the private sector side, obviously within the public sector, we're also bound by POPIA. But I think that there've been some amazing innovations and around, for example, the tax data work, where there has been an ability to anonymize data, to mask certain data so that we can make the curated data available to public sector and to the broader knowledge sector to utilize. So I think there's some lessons there. So maybe some work that needs to be taken, some sharing between the public sector and the private sector around how one responsibility does make data accessible. So thank you for that and for your reflections there, and a really nice example around using data around checking payment behavior and targeting strategies there to increase municipal revenue collection. Thanks so much for that. Julio, I was wondering, and again, I don't see another hand, so please, colleagues, do put hands up and come in the chat. But I was thinking, from SARS's perspective, what have you got right that has enabled you as an institution to have this longer term vision of saying, how do we use data that's available to us in the public realm to allow a better understanding of economic opportunity and our economy and what needs to be done? How have you got that right to have a longer term vision, a sort of a focus on the public good, rather than sort of a narrow institutional vision where you kind of protect the data and keep the data? Because as I indicated earlier, you really are a lead in that regard as an institution. So what have the factors been, what can we learn from you? Some of those critical success factors in your institution that have allowed you to have an outward vision and allowed you to collaborate in the way you have?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Prior to 2007, SARS was manually driven, whether it is tax or customs, because it's the two type of data that data set that we have. Everything was cumbersome. Taxpayer were expected to file return, bringing the paperwork. We had multiple storage for paper, which was also a fire hazard for the safety of the building, etc., etc. And as time went on, we realized that we are sitting on a pile of data, not only the data that we collect from the declaration from the taxpayer, but also the fact that we started engaging with third party to collect data from other sources, such as the banks, insurance company, medical insurance, etc. So that then made us realize to say, in actual fact, if we modernize our systems to collect this data electronically, and once we have the data available, we can then start using that same data to enable us to have kind of like a single view of a taxpayer. And this is basically where we are going with the data set that we are able to collect from the taxpayer. You'll have seen, especially in the current financial year, we have allowed taxpayers to do a self-assessment based on the available data that is already there with us as a pilot. But as we move on over the years, the idea is to have a self-assessment to be the norm and not only a single, a selected few. And as we're moving on, we also looking at, in actual fact, to have almost real-time filing, whereby taxpayers are not going to be required to file, similar to what we are seeing in the advancing economies. So part and parcel what we are doing currently is just that. And also what we have realized is to say that since we have this data, the best way for us to mine the data will be for us to have this collaborative type of attitude, because we cannot win the battles alone. And we believe that if we can have, if we can anonymize our data and ensure that the taxpayer integrity is not violated, we are able to make use of such data for research, especially for behavioral science, for us to understand what makes the taxpayer tick. When we look at your filing compliance or payment compliance behavior, using that type of data, we are able to plan ahead, and we are able to develop initiatives to encourage taxpayers to file their returns on time, and also to comply with their tax obligation, because we have a responsibility to collect tax on behalf of the government, to feed to support the government's agenda. And therefore, it's imperative that ultimately, when we do that, we do it in a responsible manner that is inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julio. I think that's really inspiring. I see Ibrahim from GCRO has put a question in the chat. Ibrahim, are you able to unmute and just come in with your voice into the platform?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Yeah, please, voice.
So, I mean, thanks for the really wonderful presentations. I have a question. So we're busy trying to construct a database of economic initiatives in Gauteng. It's not really like economic data, but it's really like what municipalities, the province, national government are doing. And we're moving along, I think, at a nice pace. However, there's two questions that we're really trying to grapple with. The one is how we open the database to stakeholders, because obviously we don't know everything. Municipalities are easy, but private companies, NGOs, etc. And secondly, it's about how do we keep it updated. And I just thought I'd ask the experts in the room for any advice that they have. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ibrahim. I'm inviting any of the panelists who would like to respond to Ibrahim's question to come in.
maybe I
Okay.
can take that from the database point of view. So I think it is very crucial to firstly understand the kind of access that we need to grant, understanding our stakeholders and their roles, and granting access according to the usage or according to the role of that particular stakeholder, because making everything accessible by everyone, as I mentioned before, if some certain information probably is too sensitive for certain stakeholders or certain number of people. So it's just a matter of understanding your stakeholders, number one, and understanding their roles, and then grant access according to that particular need. And when it comes to, in terms of how then the databases could be managed or maintained, I think the frequency at which the data is captured, is it real time? Because I think we are actually moving in that era as well, to say whatever is captured on databases is real time. What I'm capturing now, is it going to be stored now, or it still needs to be refreshed? It needs to go via another base, via somewhere for it to refresh and be seen next month, or is it going to be seen in the next 24 hours or in the next 48 hours? I think it's such things that we also have to look at when it comes to how the databases are maintained. Is it the current updated information, and how frequently is it updated? Is it monthly? Is it weekly? Is it daily? So that you'll be able to know that you are dealing with the relevant data at the right time.
Thanks so much for coming in there, Faith. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to add. So maybe just to mention from my side as well that one of the partnerships that has emerged through the collaborative work that Julio spoke about is a partnership with the United Kingdom's Office of National Statistics, where they are going to actually be conducting training in December, the first week of December in South Africa, within the public sector around how to make administrative data accessible and available. So focusing on secure data centers and platforms, and saying how does one do it in a responsible way that protects the integrity of the data, de-identifies the data that is being shared, and so on. So just, Ibrahim, if, for example, GCRO is interested in that kind of area and that kind of training, then maybe to pop an email to Khumutso or myself and just let us know, and we can try and loop you in there. So just one more question. I see Ibrahim thanked Faith there for the response. I was just wondering for our respondent, Hlompho, just a question around, you spoke about how the data comes together, how it informs policy and so on. I was just interested in maybe how receptive are your political leadership to actually evidence-based decision-making? How do you, as technical officials, utilize this data, present the data, communicates the way the data in a way that really impacts policies and decisions that are made at a high level in the metro? So maybe some reflection on that. And then also around how the data is made accessible to civil society and the private sector in the city, so they can hold you to accountable as well. So if you maybe can respond, and I'll keep an eye out on the chat or with hands. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Karen. That's a very interesting, your first question with regards to our political heads. But what is important, I think, for us is that there is the political side and there's admin side. And with us deriving policies and strategies, it is definitely, our decisions are based on what the data says, but with like any other organization, there has to be a level of intervention of what we call, you have been there, you know what's happening. How do we then merge what the data says with what it is that we know we want to get to without using the data? So it's definitely a matter of using both the data, which is literally you take on what the data is telling you, where the data is going, merging with, say, like now, data point, we had 10 mayoral priorities, which is from the political heads, right? But data showed us that we need to respond quickly to emergencies. We need to know what is happening. And with that data, the political heads agreed to have COVID response as an 11th mayoral priority. So we literally merge what the data says and with whatever it is that the strategic opinion is, and we merge the two to come up with something that we know will work for the city, for the people. That's the first one. Your second one was with regards to Karen? Sorry, just remind me.
I was just wondering how you make your data accessible to your citizenry and your private sector so that they can hold you accountable.
Oh, our data is we normally load it. We have our databases are open to the public, so anyone anywhere can go in, put in whatever, especially when it comes to surveys, whatever it is that they feel like it, where then we will tell you what the survey is saying and then put it into our survey. So it's very open. The private sector can go in, anyone literally can go into our databases.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I see we've been called back into the main meeting room. So just to thank the presenter, Mr. Ekow for a really stimulating, practical presentation based on your knowledge just around how you start setting up this capability, data management, AI capability within an organization. So thank you for that. Really appreciative. Thank you so much to the panelists who brought your expertise into the room. Faith and Julio, and then Hlompho as well from the city of Joburg. I think what was great was the very practical lessons you brought in, talking about the need to have the right tools, the right people, the right processes. Faith, talking about the issues. Data quality and demonstrating how an actual practical example of how this has been done and how the data has been valuable and organizations actually have recognized the value of data and how it can be used and how they form collaborative partnerships. And then also from the city of Joburg side, just to say the many initiatives that you're taking to use the data, to interpret the data, to help you inform your policies and your programs and plans. So thanks to everyone for a really fascinating engagement and the lessons that we can share. And I think in terms of the objectives of the session, we can say we really went a long way towards meeting them. So I'm going to ask everyone, I'm going to that you return then to the main room. I just want to see how we do that. I think we just leave the room and then it will take us back into the main room for the plenary. Thanks, colleagues. Bye.